November 10th, 2015. A cold morning in Byron Center, Michigan. The kind where the sky sits low and gray over the flat farmland and the air smells like wet leaves and diesel. Outside a funeral home on 84th Street, a man named Brian is running a mechanical lift, easing himself up the side of a tall evergreen with a string of Christmas lights looped over his shoulder. Nobody has ever looked at this corner of the property from 30 feet in the air. The basket rises. The ground drops away. Brian glances over the railing toward the small pond behind the building, past the fountain churning white water into the middle of it. And something under the surface catches the light. A shape long, rectangular, wrong. Rewind 9 years to a stretch of West Michigan where the towns run into each other without announcing themselves. Byron Township sits just south of Grand Rapids, a patchwork of 2-lane roads, corn stubble, strip malls, and old farmhouses with aluminum siding that has gone chalky in the sun. In the fall of 2006, this was not a place that made the news. It was a place of church parking lots and gravel driveways, of pickup trucks idling at four-way stops, of high school football under sodium lights on Friday nights. The people here knew each other by vehicle before they knew each other by face and living nearby. In the city of Wyoming, Michigan, was a 72-year-old man named David Lee Niles. He was not a wealthy man, and he was not a famous one. He was the sort of person who occupied the background of other people's ordinary days. The man at the end of the bar, the neighbor who waved from the mailbox. If you had passed him at a gas pump on Division Avenue, you would have forgotten him within a minute. That is what makes what happened to him so difficult to sit with. David was a man of routine, and routine was what held him together. Family and friends described him as relatable, grounded, a person who valued the small fixed points of his week. The same places, the same faces, the same familiar seats. He was not a recluse. He went out, he talked to people. He wanted to be around the low hum of other human beings. The clink of glasses, the television murmuring in the corner, the sound of a door opening and closing as people came and went. But by the autumn of 2006, the framework of his life was buckling under a weight that no routine could carry. David had been diagnosed with cancer, and alongside that diagnosis came something else, something no scan can measure. He had been living with severe depression. The two conditions fed each other in the way they so often do, the physical pain grinding down the mind stripping away the will to endure the pain. Understand what that means in practical human terms, because this is the part that gets lost when a case becomes a headline. This was a man in his 70s who woke up every morning already tired. Every appointment was a reminder. Every mirror was a status report. The body he had lived in for 7 decades had become an adversary, and there was no vacation from it, no evening off. He was in significant physical distress, and he was carrying a heavy emotional burden on top of it. His family watched it happen from the outside, which is its own particular kind of helplessness. You can drive a person to appointments. You can call to check in. You can sit with them. What you cannot do is reach inside and lift the weight off. They loved him, and they could see the toll the illness was taking on his state of mind, and they had no lever to pull. And here is the detail that gives this story its strange modern shape. In 2006, the world was on the very edge of becoming digital in the way we now take for granted. The smartphone was not yet in every pocket. People still carried flip phones that did one thing. Directions came from printouts and from memory. Google Maps had launched only the year before. In 2005, a novelty that let you float above your own house and see the roof of it from space. Almost nobody in Byron Township had any reason to do that. Why would you look at a picture of a place you drive through every single day? That indifference, that complete lack of curiosity about the familiar, is the quiet engine of this entire case. The answer would sit in plain view on a public platform available to anyone. For years and for years, nobody would look. The evening of October 11th, 2006 autumn in West Michigan comes on fast, and by the second week of October, the light is gone before dinner is finished. That night, David Lee Niles was at Jake's Bar, an establishment in Byron Township that he frequented. Picture the interior. Because it is the last interior he is known to have occupied, a low ceiling, the smell of fryer, oil, and beer, vinyl stools worn shiny in the seat, a television bracketed to the wall, sound turned down, regulars who nod instead of speaking, because a nod is enough when you have seen the same person in the same chair for years. For a man carrying what David was carrying, a room like that has a function. It is proof that the world is still turning, and that you are still inside of it. He was spending time with a friend. Then, at some point during the meetup, David stood up. There was nothing gradual about it. He got to his feet abruptly and told his friend that he was experiencing intense physical discomfort, that he was not feeling well. That is the last known statement from him, and it is worth pausing on how mundane it is. Not a farewell, not a confession, not a plan. A 72-year-old man with cancer telling a friend that he felt unwell, which is exactly what a 72-year-old man with cancer would say on any ordinary night. Nobody in that room had a reason to stop him. Nobody had a reason to follow him out, or to offer to drive him, or to make a phone call. He simply pushed back from the bar, crossed the floor, and went out the door into the dark. Now hold the geography in your mind, because the geography is the entire story. The parking lot outside was gravel and cracked asphalt, lit by whatever fixture the building offered, surrounded by the flat black of farm country at night. David got into his vehicle. He pulled out, and within a distance you could walk in 10 minutes, roughly half a mile from the place he was last seen. There was a small pond sitting on private property along 84th Street, set back from the pavement, edged with mowed grass, with a fountain installed in the middle of it to keep the water moving. Thousands of vehicles passed that pond every week. From the road at driver's eye level, you saw grass, a fountain, and the flat reflective skin of the water. You saw nothing else that was not negligence, that was physics. He drove away. And from that moment, every thread connecting David Lee Niles to the world went slack at once. No phone call, no message, no sighting. He did not come home. He did not turn up at a hospital, which would have been the natural assumption for a man who had just complained of physical distress. Hours turned into a night, and the night turned into a morning where his family had to say the sentence out loud, the one nobody wants to say. He is gone. We do not know where he is. The alarm set in, and it did not lift. A missing person report was filed, and for the people who loved him, that report opened a door into a specific kind of suffering that has a name among grief counselors. Ambiguous loss. No body, no answer, no funeral, just an empty chair and a phone that never rings, and a mind that keeps generating possibilities at 3 in the morning, forever. He was somewhere. He had to be somewhere, and the somewhere it would turn out was close enough that his friends drove past it on their way to look for him. The first hours of a missing person case are the ones that matter most. And in October of 2006, the Kent County Sheriff's Department began working the David Lee Niles disappearance the way any agency in the country would. The report was taken. The last known location was established as Jake's Bar in Byron Township. Deputies went back to that building and did the basic, unglamorous work of a canvas, moving through the room, asking the same questions of every person who had been there on the 11th. What time did he arrive? Who was he sitting with? What did he say when he stood up? Did he seem confused? Did he seem impaired? Was there an argument? The friend he had been sitting with told them what he knew, which was very little and entirely consistent. David said he did not feel well. David got up. David left. Investigators pulled a description of the vehicle and pushed it out to surrounding agencies, because in a case like this, the car is the beacon. A person can hide, a person can be carried. A sedan is a large metal object with a plate on the back of it, and large metal objects do not evaporate. So they looked for the car, and the logic of that search is the first place this case begins to go wrong through no single person's fault. When a driver disappears behind the wheel, the search radiates outward. That is the doctrine, and it is a sound one. You assume motion, you assume the vehicle traveled, you check the highways, the interstate on ramps, the routes he would have taken toward home in Wyoming, Michigan. You call hospitals in Grand Rapids because a man who just announced physical distress is a man who might have driven himself to an emergency room and collapsed in a parking structure. You contact the state police, you check the impound lots, you circulate the plate. Every one of those steps expands the perimeter, mile by mile, hour by hour away from Jake's bar. And the answer was never out there. The answer was sitting inward, tight against the starting point, roughly half a mile away on 84th Street, on the other side of a mowed strip of grass. Under about 7 feet of still water on private property search doctrine pulled every resource in exactly the wrong direction, and the further out they pushed, the further they got from him. The negative evidence began stacking up through the last weeks of October and into November. There was no financial activity, no withdrawal at an automatic teller machine, no card used at a gas station, no purchase anywhere in the state or outside of it. There were no calls placed from his phone. There was no accident report matching his vehicle. No insurance claim, no tow ticket. He had not checked into a motel. He had not filled a prescription, which mattered, because a man under treatment for cancer has a medication schedule that does not tolerate interruption. For investigators, this pattern says something specific and grim. It says he never left. A person who runs generates a trail of small transactions because running costs money. David generated nothing. That absence told detectives he was almost certainly still inside a very small circle of geography, and it told them nothing at all about where in that circle to dig. It is the cruelest kind of clue, one that narrows the world to a few square miles and then goes silent. Reported sightings came in. As they always do, someone thought they had seen him. Someone had noticed a man of that age and build somewhere in the county. Deputies ran them out one at a time, and each one collapsed under contact. Some cases build momentum from a bad tip. This one had nothing to build on. There were no tire tracks anywhere off the roadway to mark a vehicle leaving the pavement. There was no debris field, no broken guardrail, no scarred tree, none of the physical signatures a car leaves when it departs a road at speed. There were no witnesses to any crash on the night of October 11th, and 84th Street was not a deserted stretch of nowhere. It carried traffic, vehicles passed constantly, yet nobody reported headlights leaving the road, nobody reported a splash or a sound or a shape in the water at dawn. The event, whatever it was, left no scar on the surface of that community, and with no scar, there was nothing for a search team to grab. While that search radiated outward, the pond was doing its work. This is the part of the story that runs underneath everything else, silent, mechanical, and patient. That water was murky to begin with. A shallow retention pond in farm country with a mud bottom and a fountain installed in the middle of it to keep the water circulating. The fountain never stopped, and moving water is opaque water. It scatters light, it breaks up reflection. It lifts fine sediment off the bottom and holds it in suspension so that anything below becomes a smear rather than a shape. Then came the first Michigan winter. The surface froze over and snow covered the ice, sealing the pond under an opaque lid for months. Spring brought melt, then algae, a green film thickening across the top through the warm months. Every season added another layer. Silt settled onto steel. Aquatic growth climbed over glass. Mud crept up the sides. By the second summer, the vehicle was no longer a car in a pond. It was part of the pond, encrusted, colonized, held in place by the bottom itself. Detectives would later reach the same conclusion in plain language. The churning water, the murk, and the shifting sediment had concealed the vehicle from anyone standing at ground level. Not hidden by design, hidden by physics. And so the case went cold in the specific way cold cases go cold, which is not with a decision but with an absence of new information. There was no moment when someone closed a file and walked away. Instead, the tips thinned out. The active assignments moved on to cases with living leads. His name stayed in the databases, entered as a missing person, sitting in the system waiting for a match that could only come if someone somewhere found something. That is the structural problem with a case like this one. The entire architecture of missing person recovery in this country is reactive. It waits. It waits for a hiker, a hunter, a construction crew, a fisherman, a drop in a water level. If nobody stumbles onto the location, the machinery has nothing to process. There was no dive team sent to that pond because nobody had a reason to name that pond. It was one water feature among hundreds in Kent County, on private ground behind a building, half a mile from a bar. No warrant, no probable cause, no reason. The one place worth searching was the one place nobody could justify searching. For the family, the years did not pass. They accumulated. Ambiguous loss has a particular texture, and people who live inside it describe the same details over and over the phone that rings and is never him. The holidays with a chair that stays where it is because moving, it feels like a verdict. The 3 in the morning inventory of possibilities, each one worse than the last. Cycling without resolution, grief has stages. Ambiguous loss has none, because grief requires a fact to fasten itself to. And they had no fact. 5 years of this went by. 5 Michigan winters, 5 Christmases, 5 October 11ths. In 2011, David's family made a decision that families in this situation eventually have to make, and there is no version of it that does not feel like a betrayal. They accepted legally and formally that he was gone. Under Michigan practice, a person missing for a sustained period can be presumed dead through a court process. And that presumption is what unlocks the paperwork of a closed life. Estates, accounts, documents, signatures. The administrative machinery that will not move without a date of death is finally allowed to move on an assumption. They published an obituary. It is one of the most quietly devastating documents in the record of this case, because instead of the usual language, it stated the truth with no decoration at all. David Lee Niles, age 72, of Wyoming, passed away, and only God knows the time and place. Read that again and consider what it costs to write. A family 5 years in, admitting on the public page that the most basic facts of a man's ending were unavailable to them. No date, no location, no cause, and here is what they did not know as they wrote it. The time and place were both documented. The place was a specific pond at 2211 84th Street Southwest in Byron Center, and the outline of the vehicle in it had been captured from above and published on a free public platform that anyone with a computer could open in seconds. Google Maps had photographed it. The satellite imagery showed a dark rectangular silhouette under the surface, and it sat there in that imagery, viewable by the entire planet, for years. The mowed grass at the pond's edge had long since healed over whatever path the vehicle took to get there. Nobody looked, because nobody looks at the places they already know. Then came the autumn of 2015, and the funeral home across that grass began setting up its Christmas display, and somebody needed a lift to reach the top of the tree. November 10th, 2015, Byron Center. The funeral home on 84th Street is doing what it does every year at that point on the calendar, dressing the property for the holidays so the families who come through the door in December see something other than gray sky and bare branches. The tree out front is tall enough that no ladder will reach the crown of it, so a mechanical lift is brought in and positioned on the grass. Brian steps into the basket, the hydraulics whine. He rises past the lower boughs, past the level of the roofline, until he is roughly 30 feet above ground and looking down on a piece of property he has walked across hundreds of times. Behind the building, maybe a stone's throw from where the lift is parked, sits the pond. The fountain is running, pushing a white plume up out of the middle of it. Everything about the scene is exactly as it has always been. Then Brian looks straight down through the water instead of across it, and the angle changes everything. From the road at driver's eye level, light hits that pond and bounces. You see sky, you see the fountain, you see a mirror. From 30 feet up, looking almost vertically, the glare falls away and the water becomes a window. And in that window there is a shape. Rectangular, too long and too straight to be anything the pond made on its own dark. Blurred at the edges by 9 years of silt, but unmistakably manufactured. A vehicle Brian brings the lift down and calls it in. The Kent County Sheriff's Department responds. And here is where the case turns. Because deputies standing at the edge of that water can now confirm what the man in the basket saw. Then somebody does something that would not have been possible in 2006. Somebody opens Google Maps. They pull up the overhead satellite view of 2211 84th Street Southwest, and there it is. The silhouette of the car in the pond photographed from above and published to the internet. Not a shadow, not a guess. A visible outline that had been sitting on a free public platform available to any person on Earth with a keyboard for years. Read that again, because it is the systemic failure at the center of this story. And it is not the kind that gets fixed by firing anybody. There was no corrupt official. There was no falsified report. What there was instead is a gap between two systems that never talk to each other. Law enforcement search doctrine is built to radiate outward from a last known point, and it did exactly that, pushing resources toward highways and hospitals and other counties. Meanwhile, the imagery that answered the question was accumulating in a commercial mapping product with no connection whatsoever to any missing person database. Nobody had authority to search that private pond, because probable cause requires a reason, and there was no reason. Nobody thought to compare years of missing vehicle reports against updated aerial imagery of local water, because in 2006 and for years after, no protocol on Earth told them to. The answer was public, and it was free, and it was indexed, and the machinery of the investigation had no doorway into it. It took a man on a Christmas lift to close a gap that a satellite had already closed. A specialized dive team is dispatched. They go into water that is shallow, cold, and effectively blind. Feeling their way rather than seeing a heavy-duty wrecker is brought onto the grass and the cable is run out. What comes up out of that pond does not look like a car at first. The mud has claimed it. Thick sediment coats the panels. Algae has grown over the glass in a green skin. The bottom of the pond does not want to give it up, and it comes free slowly streaming brown water, the shape of a sedan emerging from underneath 9 years of accumulation. Investigators note something else immediately, and it is a detail that answers the timeline all by itself. There are no tire tracks on the surrounding grass. None, not a rut, not a depression, not a bruised line in the turf. Grass heals in a single growing season. Whatever path this vehicle took to the water, the ground had erased it long ago, which told them without any laboratory work at all that this car had not gone in last week or last month. It had been down there for years. And when they looked inside the cabin, they found what they already knew in their stomachs they would find. Remains still in the vehicle, undisturbed. The remains were taken into the custody of the medical examiner, and the identification process ran on 2 independent tracks, which is standard practice when a case has been open this long and a family has already been told once informally that there is no hope. Inside the submerged car, investigators recovered a wallet, and the wallet belonged to David Lee Niles. That is a strong indicator and nothing more, because a wallet identifies property rather than a person. So the medical examiner used the methods that carry legal weight. Dental records were compared. The charted work of a man who had sat in an examination chair decades earlier now matched against what was recovered. DNA testing was performed. Both came back the same. The identification was made definitively. 9 years, 1 month, and 30 days after David Lee Niles stood up from a bar stool half a mile away and said he did not feel well. He was found, and he was named, and he stopped being a case number. Investigators then did what good investigators do with a scene like this, which is to test the ugliest possibility first. They examined the vehicle and the location for any sign that someone else had been involved. Was there evidence that the car had been pushed? Was there evidence of a second party at the water's edge? Was there anything about the position of the vehicle, the condition of the interior, or the circumstances of the recovery that pointed toward another person's hand in it? The answer after examination was no. Authorities officially ruled out foul play. The conclusion they reached and stated publicly was that David's death was likely either an accident, a man in significant physical distress, leaving the road in the dark on a rural stretch and entering water he never saw coming, or a deliberate act by a man who had been living with cancer and severe depression, and who had reached the end of what he could carry. Both possibilities remain on the record, and law enforcement did not claim to know which one it was. That restraint deserves respect. It would have been easy to pick the tidier answer. They did not. And there is the thing that settled over Byron Township once the wrecker had gone and the water had stilled. For 9 years, this community had lived directly on top of the answer. The regulars at Jake's Bar had driven past that pond on their way to look for him. School buses had passed it twice a day. Delivery trucks, church traffic, farm equipment. The entire ordinary flow of a West Michigan township had moved along 84th Street within a few dozen feet of a man's final location, week after week, season after season, while his family sat at 3 in the morning generating theories about other states and other countries. Nobody was careless. Everybody was simply human, and human beings do not examine the familiar. The fountain kept the water opaque. The silt kept climbing. The grass grew back over the entrance wound in the turf. The pond did not hide him out of malice. It hid him because that is what murky, moving water does, and because no one in that township had a single reason to look at a small pond behind a funeral home and see anything other than a small pond behind a funeral home. What his family received at long last was a fact. That sounds small. It is not. For 5 years they had lived without one. Long enough that in 2011 they had to sign paperwork declaring a man dead on an assumption, and publish an obituary that admitted in plain language that only God knew the time and the place. In November of 2015, the place acquired an address, 2211 84th Street, Southwest, Byron Center, Michigan. There could be a burial. There could be a service with a casket that was not empty. Ambiguous loss finally had something to fasten itself to, and grief, real grief, the kind that moves through stages and eventually loosens its grip, was allowed to begin 9 years late. In the years that followed the recovery, the land around that pond was converted into a public space, open to the township that had unknowingly kept vigil over it for a decade. It was officially named the David Lee Niles Memorial Park. A quiet man who spent his last evening in the background of somebody else's ordinary night now has his name on a sign at the edge of the water that held him, so that the people who drive 84th Street will read it and remember that he was there the whole time. He was not far away. He was never far away. He was half a mile from the last room he sat in, visible from the sky, waiting for one person to look at something they had already seen 1,000 times and finally see it.